We good?
We're live.
Are we live?
Go for it. You're live, mate. Go for it. You do this every week.
Mate, well, I just thought you were going to dive in this week.
No, I did it last week. I got that out of my system.
Welcome everyone to today's live. My name is Drew Ennis and this is
Scott Aggett, founder of Hello House.
Founder of Hello House. And so I'm the CEO of Hello House, and together we are going to present today's Get Buyer Ready session. And it's a great session today.
Yeah, we're going to talk about asset selection, Drew.
Asset selection.
It's crucial, and
Mate.
so many buyers get it absolutely wrong. And you know, if we Sam in our team posted a stat this week in the Get Buyer Ready community that talked about buying a home in Australia right now for $1 million.
Yeah.
Fast forward 10 years, Drew, to when you go to sell that house, which is the average hold period for an Aussie homeowner. The difference between a 6% growth rate annually and a 7% growth rate annually ends up $177,000 difference. So if you're looking to buy, house A, or you're looking to weigh that up against house B, the difference down the track could cost you nearly $200,000. Now that's just 6 to 7%. Sam spends a lot of time with our Hello House customers looking at the difference between, say, 6 and an 8% return annually. So really, asset selection is key. So today, if we can jump in and talk about some of the pitfalls of property selection for the buyers make, some of the different things that we look for when we're trying to break down the value of a property, and how to see if it's appealing or not appealing, and whether it's going to have a lot of buyer competition or whether you're going to perceive to pick it up for a bargain, and why that may be.
Yep. Perfect.
Yep.
Awesome.
Cool. All right.
And obviously this is all part of being buyer ready. Being buyer ready is all about you not just having your finance, but it's all about understanding, what your budget is, where you're focusing on buying, and then actually reconciling your ideal wish list. Yep. And then being able to, when you're out there inspecting the property, you're looking at that sort of dream home or investment property, being able to, really look through your list and make sure the asset meets all of your criteria, but also go a little bit deeper, because that's what you're going to be talking about today, isn't it? So not just looking at a superficial level. Sam and I were talking about this the other day. Isn't it crazy that, people turn up to a 15-minute open for inspection, they have a bit of a superficial look around, and then they're diving in for millions of dollars.
Absolutely. Yep.
Yeah?
And agents love that as well, because they know that you're emotionally invested in the process, but you're not particularly well researched. And they'll use that to their advantage to ensure you pay an emotional premium. So
absolutely.
We can unpack a few simple things really to start with. We've spoken about at length already in the previous Facebook Lives that we've done over the last month or so about building that shopping list and starting with that unbelievably strong foundation that you go from there on and hit the road running. Talking to agents, building rapport. But when you start to look at your location that you chose, you've got to look at all of these properties in the flesh. We've discussed this before, but looking and relying upon agents' marketing material that you see online is just not going to cut it. So the average amount of property that an average buyer, I should say, sees in 2022 is about 300 properties. That's 300 in the flesh or online. The problem is, we know most buyers are lazy, and those 300 are predominantly made up with things that they've seen online.
We know you're not lazy.
Yeah, you're here educating yourself, which is good. But most buyers, unfortunately, are doing exactly that. So it's 300 properties, most of which have been looking at on the back end of realestate.com or Domain. And the problem is, it's very difficult to see the faults of that property because it's been presented in its absolute best light by the agent, as you could expect, who's representing the seller and who wants to sell for the highest possible price. So you're not going to see things like privacy issues from neighbouring properties. You're not going to see or hear traffic noise. They're going to hide issues with the home, so it's very difficult to get an idea of a sense of the room sizes. Some people some agents, I should say, deliberately don't put a floor plan there because they don't want to show how small the rooms are. So there's all these little tricks and nuances that agents are going to apply to make it difficult for a buyer to establish where the market value sits. So if you're sitting at home on your phone or on your desktop, going through all the sold properties or seeing things online, and you're determining value based on what you see in those images or in any of that marketing material, you're going to get caught out. You're going to get caught out because you're only seeing the best of these properties and you're not seeing them warts and all. So that's the very first thing. Once you've got your shopping list, make sure you're physically out there on the ground inspecting. And of course, not all locations are equal, right? You know, you could look at a street and say, okay, great. You know, we want to be on Wild Duck Road in Mermaid Waters, to be specific.
Where we are
right now. But what's good and bad on Wild Duck? You know, are all things presented evenly? They're not. You know, there's some houses that are closer to, you know, Marcary Street. There's some houses that are closer to Bermuda Street behind us. There's some that back onto the waterfront. There's some that back onto a public park.
Right next to the childcare centre.
There's one next to the childcare centre. So there's a lot going on just in our street right where we're standing right now today. So you've got to physically drive your hood. You've got to understand where the plus and minus locations are in certain streets and in certain pockets to really understand where the value is, and also understand where you want to live. So going back to the point that we discussed about 6% growth or 7% growth over 10 years, you've got to weigh that up, because you might you're going to get yourself into a situation where you find a property that might be great value in a pocket that you like. You're going to weigh that up against another property that is even better value, and it's not quite in the pocket that you like. It's a better house, it's bigger, might be closer to the school zone, but it backs onto a busier road, or it might be on a corner block that's exposed on a roundabout. And are you going to be prepared to trade off those negatives to find something that's at a better price point, or to get more space, or what it might be? So you've got to be aware of these things before you make value decisions.
Yeah, absolutely.
That makes sense?
Yeah, and you can't just go, like, you know how you talk about the agents presenting the property in its best light. They're also selecting the best time of day.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yep. So even if you think that the property meets all of your criteria, and you've gone, you're not just looking at a superficial level. You can't just go at that one time of day. I think you've got to go in the morning. You've got to go late in the evening. You've got to try and mix it up and really understand what's happening in your location. That's
good advice. And a little trick that I always coach our clients to do is not only do what Drew said, which is go and see it at 2 different times of the day, but you choose the times, because what happens is agents will control their diary to work out traffic flow, natural light and noise and those things as well. So if you give them the opportunity, they're going to corral you into a time that works for them. They're also going to introduce competition to you deliberately. So they're going to book another appointment at the same time, and they'll get someone there to create some sort of competition that you're going to have to compete against at a future point. So control that process and say, I want to see it specifically at this time and privately, and I'm going to need half an hour to do it. So I don't feel rushed, and I haven't got anyone else there that's going to impact my inspection of the property in fine detail. So that's a good point that you raise.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, and it's interesting. I think you sort of have to correlate with that post that Sam did when he was talking about, you know, $1 million property, 1% difference in growth over 10 years is 177 grand.
Yeah.
So I think you've got to look at it from the perspective of how long would it take you to make that 177,000 and tax free.
Well, if it's your own principal place of residence, there's no tax for sure.
Yeah. You know, and so I don't think because I don't think a lot of people weigh it up. You know, that could be the equivalent of, you know, having to work another
few years.
Many years for some people.
Yeah. And if you're heading into retirement and you're holding that property and it's your big ticket into, you know, the sunset, the great sunset, you'll be there soon, mate. You better make some good decisions around, you know, investing well. Oh, no, I meant you're going to be ready to...
It's good sunsets in Wood Duck.
All good. Let's change the subject to something other than your age.
Exactly.
Let's talk about zoning. Yeah. Look good. Let's talk about zoning, because this is one that is really confusing for newbie buyers. They don't quite understand certain premiums that get paid and why homes are more desirable than others. We had one yesterday. So we were looking at buying in South Australia yesterday for a client of ours at Hollow House. There were certain comparable sales that made that property sit within a price point that you could see was fairly consistent with other sales locally. But this house had DA approval for 2 new lots to be created in the garden. in the back garden.
Amazing.
That catapulted the price probably about, we were talking 550 to up to probably low 700s. A big difference. And if you don't understand why that was valuable and you had no intentions of ever building anything in the backyard and actually creating that value and adding to the asset over time, then you're going to be firmly, stuck at 550, and then you're going to miss out. You're competing against properties where people are already seeing value in the 700s, and that's exactly what happened with our buyer yesterday. They just weren't quite aware of that added value of having the different zoning and the fact that the previous owner, or the current owner, I should say, that's selling, had gone to the lengths of getting DA approval to develop on that land, and how much of an uptick that had on the property's price.
Yeah, so it still may have been right. It's just a different strategy.
Absolutely, but it's just being aware of that if you're looking at those properties, you need to go one layer further than just looking on Real Estate Domain and search for what the zoning is and understand what that means to the potential property price. And a good example of something that's quite common is going from single home sites like low density to medium density, which might be the ability to create 2 villas on the land, or a subdivision or something similar like that, maybe a granny flat or something at the back that could be added. So those properties tend to be in high demand, and when they come to market, there's a lot of buyers that were passive that will all of a sudden be in that marketplace. And I'm talking property flippers, builders, interior designers, small developers, mum and dad investors that know how to add value to the property as well. So understanding the zoning is really important. And it can be a really good strategic play if you're buying as well to add value long term. So if you buy something that's got the right zoning, you may have no intention of doing anything with that property in terms of adding the granny flat or doing a subdivision. But if it's got the ability to do that, as that suburb becomes more and more desirable over time and more people want to live there, then that's going to become sought after property. Right? It's going to be in high demand, and you'll get the benefit of that zoning when you go to sell the property down the track. So something to be really conscious of.
Yeah, absolutely. There's more of that going around, isn't there? People having, what is it? Most kids are sticking around until 30.
Yeah.
So everyone's looking for properties that can have, mixed families on it. And
yeah. It's something, this last 12 months or so, 12 to 18 months, I think it's become more relevant to Aussie buyers than it ever has before. For my career prior to that, there wasn't as many buyers that would contact us and say, I'm looking at things that have the ability for us to add value to, beyond just a normal renovation, things that they can actually develop. So I think it's becoming a lot more mainstream.
Yes.
You said what was your word for a builder, like a mum and dad investor or a small-time developer? That is becoming more prevalent, I think, in Australian buying circles. So if you can aim to find one of those properties that has got the ability to increase in value over time, even without you having to touch it, I think that's a really smart thing to do.
Yep, agreed.
Yep.
What else? What's next?
Well, I think you should focus on aspects as well. This is something that's really relevant for us because it comes up a lot day to day, is what's a north-facing view versus a south-facing view, for example. I'll give you a really good case study of this. A client that we had yesterday buying from Thailand with Hulla House wants to buy on the Gold Coast, which is close to our heart because we live here. And he wanted to buy on the canal, and we were weighing up the merits of north-facing properties versus south-facing waterfronts and how much of an impact that has on the purchase price.
Yes.
And also how much of an impact it has on livability. And livability is a big one. They were buying it as their principal place of residence. So first and foremost, you've got to think, okay, how is my family going to live in this property and how are we going to enjoy that space? And then how is the market going to perceive that aspect when it comes time to offload it in 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, or whatever it might be as well. And if you're a Gold Coast local, most people would avoid a south-facing waterfront because the southerly just batters you. And the north-facing ones are typically very protected, and you've got all-day sun, and it's more desirable. So there's just little things like that. There's, I could go into this in more detail and talk about the power of east versus west and west versus east and so on. So you've got to really understand your market, the aspect of the property and the local area and what's desirable. And that's including things that have got a view. What's a view worth?
Yeah, exactly. Well, like when you think about this, you've got to weigh up like western sunsets, mountain views.
Mm-hmm.
If you can buy this at a price that's lower than, you know, say a north front water block, and you're somebody that is at a different life stage, and you're, you know, off to work in the morning and you're not home till late in the night, and you're not really going to enjoy the benefit of the sun throughout the day.
Yep.
You know, I think all of those decisions need to be factored in.
That's a very good point, actually, in terms of where you're at in your life cycle.
Yeah.
When I was a selling agent at Bell Property in Potts Point, we used to sell a lot in a building called the Icon. And the Icon faced east and west. It was the old Chevron Hotel where the Beatles stayed when they were there in the 60s. It was converted by Mirvac into a luxury apartment complex. We were really active in that building, and a lot of the buyers would say to us, look, I don't want to pay the premium on the western side to see the bridge and the Opera House, which is what 80% of people or 85% of people wanted to pay to have that luxury view. Because I'm not there at that time of day. I'm an early riser. I want the east-facing view out to Sydney Heads, and I want to see all the boats and the water, because I find that way more relaxing than the intense westerly afternoon sun, of which I don't get to enjoy it very often anyway. So it's horses for courses, but you've got to be aware of what those views or those aspects are going to add to the value of the property, so that you don't get caught out. There's no point going to look for a north-facing waterfront and then say, well, I'm not going to pay a premium for the north because I'm happy with south. It's like, well, you're not going to buy that property because there's going to be people competing against you that are going to pay a premium for the north.
Yeah, exactly.
So you just got to be aware of what you're buying, how desirable it is in the marketplace, and then you can factor in your analysis of where it sits in the pecking order for you.
Yeah, perfect.
Yeah.
So life stage is a factor as well. So, you know, people have got to put that on their shopping list.
Yeah.
Where are we at in our life stage? How are we going to use the property? How are we going to... It's all about the use and enjoyment, because it may not be important to you today, but in 5 or 10 years' time when you're selling, when your life stage has transitioned, it may be important to you then.
Yeah, or even to your point about life stage, and you might not want to sell it in 10 years, it might be your forever home, but how is this floor plan or aspect or layout going to impact your quality of life when you're in your later years? So a lot of times people will say to me, we want to downsize to a single level, or we need access for a disabled chair for a ramp. There's lots of different things like that that go into the equation as well. So you've got to forward think that. Another big one at our age is, catering for in-laws. Right, you're going through it at the moment with your father-in-law. I've had it on my family as well, and it's relevant for so many of us, I'm sure, that are buying property, that it's, do we have a space that we can cater for an older person that's level, that's got a shower, a bathroom, it's got a kitchenette or something like that, that they can have their own independence, but within the family nucleus and not too far away. Or it might be the other end of the spectrum, and you want, teenage kids, as you said, kids are staying around longer. They want their own space. They can't afford to go out there. They're still studying or whatever it might be. If you could give them an opportunity to live on site, but with a completely separate entrance and the rest of it, then that's going to be something that you need to forward plan for as well.
Yeah, and I think, like socially too, we're a lot more liberal, I think. And so, having teenage kids that want their own privacy and, they're going to hang around a lot longer, these are considerations that modern families need to focus today.
Yeah, cater on. Yeah. And I guess that kind of takes us into the ideal floor plan and how much that really impacts a purchasing decision as well. We see so many properties that have got terrible layouts, bad use of bringing light into the home or heating the house. And that really impacts your enjoyment of the property, but it also really impacts the saleability. So if you've got a property that hasn't been opened up in a modern way at the back to the garden, or you've got small windows and no natural light, and you need to bring in skylights and those things as well, that's definitely a consideration that's going to hurt you when you go to sell that property. And it's going to be very desirable for buyers if those things have already been done, or the layout makes it favourable for you to go in and do that at a low cost later. Because with your construction background, bashing out walls and things is fine, but if they're structural and it doesn't have the right ceiling heights, or the plumbing's in the wrong direction, plumbing's in the wrong spot in the house, then these things can be really expensive to retrofit. Getting air conditioning into certain spaces that might be tight can be really hard. And certain buyers for different types of price points will demand it's got air conditioning, for example. So if you can't tick that box, then how do you come up with those solutions to make your property more desirable to either live in or to sell.
Yeah.
Yeah. Floor plan's a big one for me. We have, I've got a lot of history of selling things off the plan and selling apartments and things as well, being an estate agent. And people would come to us, certainly with apartments, very specifically looking for the right floor plan. It's that important. So they would come to me, and if I use that icon example in Potts Point, people would come to me and say, I only want an O1 and O3, and it's got to be level 9 or above. Level 9 cleared Rockville Gardens, the building in front of it. So that gave them a point blank view of the Bridge and Opera House. And the O1s and O3s faced west. They were the best use of the floor plans with no wasted space. So buyers are that savvy that they know exactly the right floor plan that's going to work for their needs and what's going to give them the best capital growth. You need to be thinking like that as well. So you need to identify a house or an apartment and really study the floor plan, understand the dimensions, understand how it's going to work with your furniture layout as well. What can be built in, what's going to have to be freestanding, what do you need to buy? What can you use out of your own existing furnishings and to make that space work? And then to the point that we just discussed before about retrofitting, can I add air conditioning? Can I extend it here? Has it got the space to do it? We bought a great house in Kensington a couple of weeks ago for a client in Sydney for just under $4 million, and it was a renovation project. They were looking at multiple renovation projects. We dismissed so many of the homes because the floor plans were a complete dog's breakfast. Yeah. They were, and through my eyes, from a development perspective, I'd look at it and go, that's going to be really difficult to create a family home at a reasonably fair cost. You're going to have to make major structural changes to that house. And do you want to do that, or do we want to look for a house that's got the right bones and it's got the right layout that it's easy to add to that and retrospectively change the floor plan and add square meters. So the home that they bought was really well defined, the floor plan was very simple, and literally they just had to add a box on at the back and go upstairs and create a master suite up there. So a really easy solution and much lower cost and much faster to build. Yeah,
so I mean that gives people some great insight into how we go above and beyond with our clients. It's not just about analysing value to make sure that you're not overpaying, and it's not just about negotiating on your behalf to out-negotiate the selling agent. It's actually taking a step back and us looking holistically at the asset that you've put in front of us to determine actually whether through our expert eyes it meets your criteria.
If it's desirable.
Yeah. Because like an average buyer that is not, used to looking at it from all different angles, buildability, renovate, how easy it's going to be to renovate, obstacles and so on and so forth. That's where they can just sort of get suckered into buying something. And I think that's why the statistic, 45% of people have buyer remorse.
Yeah, because they're not thinking ahead of things. So example with the property in Kensington that we're talking about just there, I went a layer deeper that they weren't thinking about, which was around the fact that was there any heritage trees that were going to be protected they couldn't build where they wanted to build, because they just look at the floor plan and of course the agent hasn't written any of the trees in there or shown anything. It just has this big grass or big open expanse. And then, when you really look at it, like on Google Maps, or you dig out the photos and you do it properly, there's some major trees, like some mature trees there. And if you speak to council in certain areas of Australia, they're not going to let you remove those. And that's going to dictate where you can build or where you can't.
It might be the difference between a swimming pool or no swimming pool.
Correct. And that goes right down to, is there a sewer line running across it or a water pipe? There's a reason why you employ an expert. It's not just, as Drew said, for the analysis and the negotiation. It's because we've had all these thrown at us over the years. We understand the extra detail that you've got to look into before you make any value decision. Yeah. And one big one that comes across all the time for us is buyers comparing property A and B. So they'll come to me and say, okay, what do you think of this one versus that one? And again, they'll make a value decision in their own mind based on what they perceive they can buy the property for, but they'll show the properties to me and then I'll look at them and give them my advice and say, okay, well, property A has got a beautiful facade, lovely open to the street, it's got great curb appeal, really good street presence, and that's going to bode well for capital growth. It's a nice home. Property B is behind a huge compound wall. It's a really ugly facade. It's been poorly built. It's going to need a lot of work. There's trees and things in the wrong spots that make it really awkward. And it's just not that desirable of a home in terms of first, glance. First time when a buyer walks through a property and really falls in love with it. Yeah. And that's what could be the difference when you go to sell that property later on. Yeah. It's going to make a really big difference to the actual sale price because of its, curb appeal.
Yeah. All right, mate. What if we're 27 minutes in, I think we're going to wrap up this call. So what's your final words of wisdom here?
I think try and find properties that are unique. So don't buy properties that are easily replicatable. And so if you're going to go buy something that's in a new housing estate and they all look the same, you're probably not going to get a premium when it comes time to sell your property because there's 10 houses in your street or in your suburb that look exactly the same. And when you go to sell in 10 years' time or whatever it might be, you've got no control if one of those other properties comes to market at a similar time. That's going to impact the desirability on it for purchasers as well. So try and find properties that are more unique than the cookie cutter properties that just that aren't going to be as desirable long term. And that goes down to also shows like The Block. It goes the other way. So if you find something that's incredibly unique, it might be right now all the rage is brass taps and country tiles, and I've seen on The Block this year that it's all sort of tartan furnishings and things in the bedrooms. Well, that's all good for today, but The Block comes out again this time next year, and it'll all be completely different. So if you're paying an emotional premium to buy what's hot today, very likely in a year's time or in 10 years' time, that's going to be not cool. And you would have paid a premium that you're not going to get back from when you sell the home as well. So really think about those things. Don't buy the bland one unless you can add value to it and make it different. And don't buy the super trendy one unless you're prepared to, write off some capital growth over time as well.
And also obviously something that might be really flavour of the month for you when you come to sell it, there may be zero market for it.
Absolutely, yeah. So one thing I'll just finish on really quickly. Sam and I spend a lot of time doing this each time we analyse a property for a client before we make any negotiation strategy. Often we see a property in a suburb that's seeing great growth. So we'll look back 10 years plus at the growth rate. And there's certain assets within a suburb that just haven't performed at that level. So even though the median growth might be for the suburb, 9%, for example, in Mermaid Waters, I'm just picking any suburb in Australia here because we're standing in Mermaid Waters. This house that we're standing in Wild Duck might have only seen 5% growth per annum, compared to 9% for the rest of the suburbs. So you've really got to choose. It's not just about looking at the data and go, Mermaid Waters, every house has gone up 9%. It's not the case. There's a lot of hit and misses within those suburbs, and often when we go to analyse a property, we'll do the 10-year spread and go, actually, this is really underperformed. And when you dig and scratch the surface a little bit more, often there's a very specific reason. So one that comes to mind that Sam and I did a couple of weeks ago for a client, backed onto a train line. So the train line was deep behind the property, possibly didn't even affect it from a noise perspective, but over a 10-year period that they've owned the property, it's hit them really hard in terms of the impact of capital growth versus what the suburb has done. Big difference, in terms of hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars. So things aren't even right across the suburbs, so be very careful about your asset selection, which is what today's been all about.
Awesome. Okay, well, in wrapping up the call, remember, just if you've got any comments, please just put your comments down below. If you've got any questions, we'd love to address live questions on this call. So if you're watching the recording of this and you're actually out there shopping for a home at the moment or an investment property, and you're having, coming up against challenges throughout the buying process, so not sure on how to analyse the value or not sure how to create that, that just ideal shopping list, whatever it is, then, please, we'd encourage you to put your questions down below. We'll then be able to address them on our next call. And we'd love to see more of you actually signing up for the course. The Find section of the Get Buy Ready course at the moment is completely complimentary. All right, so there's absolutely no reason why there isn't 340 odd of you in the in the find section to get a taste of the value that's in there, and it's going to help you learn how to access, you know, more of those pre and off market opportunities if you're currently in the market to buy a property. And also we'd love to do like a complimentary discovery call. You know, it's complimentary. So if we can learn more about your goals, your buying objectives, then we might be able to add some value to that.
Absolutely. Cool. Thanks,
All right.
guys.
All right. Bye
We'll
for
see you
now.
next week, next Wednesday.
Bye for now.
See you later.